Hello, my name is Alan Borst, and I am the administrator of the Creative Writing Program at the University of Utah. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the first of our three virtual public events that comprise our 2021 Borderlands Conference. Today, we host Julian Herbert and Cristina Rivera Garza for a reading and moderated Q&A and discussion. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. Mountain Time, Fernanda Melchor and Eduardo Halfon will be reading and engaging in a Q&A as well. And then at 12 p.m. Mountain Time tomorrow, all four of our Borderlands guests will participate in a roundtable conversation. I'll post a link to these events and details with registration information in the Zoom chat momentarily. I'd also like to let you know that we will be recording all three of these Borderland events and make those recordings available on our University of Utah English Department YouTube channel. Please note that we invite you to submit questions in English and Spanish via the built-in Zoom Q&A feature throughout the program. In order to post a question or view other attendees' questions, you can click on the Q&A button along the bottom of your Zoom window. Before I turn things over to our Borderlands Conference organizer and host, Michael Mejia, let me take another moment to note that as part of the Guest Writers series, the Borderlands Conference was made possible through the University of Utah's English department and received funding from the Salt Lake County Zoo Arts and Parks program and Utah Humanities. Utah Humanities empowers groups and individuals to improve their communities through active engagement in the humanities. This series and this event is also supported in part by the Utah Division of Arts and Museums with funding from the state of Utah and the National Endowment for the Arts. Thank you to the University of Utah Center for Latin American Studies. Thank you also to creative writing graduate student Jesse Cohn, who will be introducing Cristina Rivera Garza later in the program. Without further ado, Borderlands Conference organizer and host, Michael Mejia.
Greetings. Hola y bienvenidos a todos. Thanks, Alan, for the introduction, and thanks all of you for coming out this evening. Though we are gathered in the ether tonight, as we have been over the past several months, many of us are seated here in front of our screens in Utah. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging that this land, which is named for the Ute tribe, is the traditional and ancestral homeland of the Shoshone, Paiute, Goshute, and Ute tribes. The University of Utah recognizes and respects the enduring relationship that exists between many indigenous peoples and their traditional homelands. We respect the sovereign relationship between tribes, states, and the federal government, and we affirm the University of Utah's commitment to a partnership with Native nations and urban Indian communities through research, education, and community outreach activities. As Alan mentioned, my name is Michael Mejia. I'm a professor in the English department here at the U, teaching in the creative writing program. And I'm really pleased and excited to welcome you to this first event of the 2021 Borderlands Conference. So before we get started, just some brief comments for context on these events. The first Borderlands Conference was conceived in the wake of a presidential election that sought to depict immigrants from Mexico as violent criminals. That conference took place in spring 2019 following a midterm election that framed Central American migrants fleeing poverty, climate change-related crop failures, and rampant gang violence as an invading horde. So in short, there was an urgent need for a critical and creative discussion here about the space of the borderlands, a space we share not just with Mexico, but with Latin America, our immense and culturally rich neighbor with whom we share a surname. Our initial group of authors, Yuri Herrera, Francisco Cantu, Natalie Center-Zapico, and Antonio Ruiz Camacho's works were focused quite directly on the US-Mexico border and on migration. This year's lineup shares some of that focus, but the authors also connect that narrow geographical space to a much wider world of internal and global migration, from marginalized subpopulations to Jewish survivors of the Holocaust, as well as to the nomadic wanderings of artists, academics, literary works, and language itself. So again, I just want to thank you all for attending tonight's event, and I want to thank our four authors for crossing borders of time, space, technology, and language to share their work with us over the next 2 days. Our first reader tonight will be Julian Herbert. As he details in his exquisitely heartbreaking and often wrathfully hilarious nonfiction novel Tomb Song, Julian Herbert experienced a deeply peripatetic youth in his native Mexico. He has referred to himself as, quote, the product of social mobility, a migrant, although I never left my country, unquote. Though he was born in the South in Acapulco, he grew up in the North, very near the border with the United States, he says, where the only TV channel available came from Laredo, Texas, offering him English language cartoons. Working as a copy editor and reporter in his late teens and early 20s, Julian was at the same time studying the classics of Spanish literature at university, analyzing Golden Age sonnets and Don Quixote, while teaching himself American grunge anthems at home. This eclectic, kaleidoscopic, perhaps schizophrenic bilingual border environment of literature, theory, and popular culture is reflected in Herbert's consistently surprising and unsettling literary output. He is the author of 11 books of poetry and prose, including the collection of stories Bring Me the Head of Quentin Tarantino, I'm using the translation, and 2 remarkable hybrid books translated into English as the aforementioned Tomb Song, a unique take on autofiction focused on the death of Herbert's mother from leukemia, and The House of the Pain of Others, a fictionalized history investigating the 1911 massacre of Chinese immigrants in the city of Torreon at the beginning of the Mexican Revolution. Within his intimate and often comic personal narratives, Herbert has woven a consistently scathing critique of Mexico, which he refers to in Tomb Song as, quote, a country of waiters, and with some irony, the sweet nation, a nation parodied in his story Z in the process of tipping over into total failure, into a mindless, sedentary cannibalism, as absurd as it is gruesome, and also, it seems, metaphorically accurate given the persistent impunities of state and narco-terror. Z's narrator postulates, in fact, a genetic compulsion to institutionalize murder and self-destruction. And yet, the sweet nation is indeed also a mother, capable of providing some solace despite her ample everyday cruelties. Shored up against these, the perceptive observations of Herbert and his narrators frequently provide glimpses of the quiet indulgences and generosities of spirit by which Mexico's citizens, her children, find ways to sustain themselves and each other, to share a heart as well as blood. Please help me in welcoming Julian Herbert.
Thank you for this invitation to the University of Utah. Thank you, Michael, for this warm presentation. And I'll just skip to the reading. And thank you all for being here. And I'm a little bit nervous, but I will try to read this fragment of this story. Is C, translated by Cristina McSweeney, wonderfully translated by Cristina McSweeney. And I just want to say briefly that the letter C for this story is about, of course, zombies, but in Mexico, one of the, maybe the cruelest cartel, drug cartel in the last, a few years ago was the Los Zetas, that's the name in Spanish. And so this story is about zombies and Zetas. I communicate with my psychoanalyst by phone. My psychoanalyst is called Tadeo. Tadeo pretends to be an impartial judge, but I can see he's in favor of me allowing me myself to be beaten. That's no surprise. He was first eaten 5 months ago. It's not a matter of ethics, he says. It's about solidarity, which in your case, at an existential level, means continuing to be alone. I almost burst out laughing. He's talking about existentialism as if he were alive. He's a good National University kid. I changed the subject so as not to appear to be making light of his situation. Why not come upstairs so we can talk face to face, or at least mouth to ear? We are mouth to ear. I mean, through the door. No, my friend, he replies in an extremely somber tone. with the insincere serenity imparted by his academic training. I've made it a rule not to smell my patients. Except for Delfina, I said, hoping to provoke him. Tadeo clears his throat to cover a brief silence, then responds, Delfina has no smell now, and she's not my patient any longer. For the last year, I've been living in the Hotel Majestic, located on one side of the Zócalo in Mexico City. Once a week, Tadeo comes around and does a home psychoanalysis session. At first, he used to come up to my room on the fourth floor. We'd make ourselves comfortable. He'd sit on a poorly upholstered chair. I'd perch on the bed and chat. We generally left the television on to provide some background noise and deaden the carnivorous clacking of the guests in the next room. Tadeo was the most sensible man I'd ever met until Delfina. I never seen her, but I imagine she's good looking, seduced him, and as a sort of tribute, took a few mouthfuls of his left forearm, thus infecting him and causing, without a shadow of a doubt unintentionally, 6 months of therapy to go up in smoke. Since then, Tadeo and I have held our sessions via the insipid phone in the lobby. Human, I say. Pardon? What you mean is that Delfina has no human smell. Wouldn't it be just the same if you called from your office? Human, yes. Honestly, coming here is just an overreaction. Who'd connect the call? There's not a soul left in the lobby. He talks about professionalism, but he was having sex with his clients, eventually fell for one of them, and because he was in love, allowed himself to be transformed into a beast. Or not a total beast, a cannibal in transition. I've said this to him, and he acknowledges it, then sadly adds, maybe I should be your patient. It's a pleasantry. We both know that I'm no good, just a fragmented, egoistical master of ceremonies, incapable of helping anyone, even when half the human race is mutating toward death or depression. Tadeo claims it's not a matter of ethics, but solidarity. The truth is that lately it's been a matter of food. I venture out to try to find some after dark. There are hardly any mature somnambulists around at that time. They prefer to hunt during the day, although twilight is their favorite hour. In the early days, I was afraid to go outside. I survived on beyond sell-by-date leftovers from the hotel kitchen. Greenish cold cuts, rancid cheese, chocolate, frozen soup, dried fruit. However, as the months have passed, I've gained enough confidence not only to make forays to the local stores for provisions, but also to have something resembling a social life. My greatest success in that respect has been acting as the MC of the skateboarding competitions on Eugenia. My alimentary excursions provide everything I need, from Pachuca empanadas to granola bars, gallon bottles of mineral water to free liquor. The other day, behind the counter of a former print shop, I found a bag of marijuana and another containing what looked like psychotropic pills. I returned them to their place. When it comes to illegal substances, I'm prejudiced. As long as no one kills me, everything is mine. The country has become a minefield of teeth, but it's also a bargain basement. Thanks to the fantastical efforts of people whose business instincts drive them to do their duty each day, I enjoy a few of the old services that, in some unconscious way, used to make it pleasant to live among humans. Fresh Tetra Brick milk in the mornings, for example. A delivery truck still supplies the 7-Eleven on the corner of Moneda and Licenciado Verdad, despite the fact that the store has been looted 4 times in the last week and no one works there anymore. Just a few junky-faced dispatchers with bite marks on their backs who'll take your money as soon as they've ransacked what little remains in the establishment, all the while shaking like ex-boxers with Parkinson's. A few nights ago, I came across an amazing windfall. Moldy falafel and hummus, 2 pounds of pistachios seasoned with garlic and hot chili, half a strip of Coronado popsicles, a bottle of Appleton State rum, and an iPod with, among other vaguely obscure gems, smetanas from my life. I waited until sundown on Friday to celebrate my discovery. I decided to have a picnic. Headphones on, I took my booty up to the terrace of the Majestic. When I recount this episode to Tadeo, he falls back on the analytical approach he's been using to treat me for just over a month. Have you thought about why you did that? Like I said, to celebrate. And you don't think there might be some other reason? Some hidden vein of your need to put yourself in danger? Sunset is the very worst time for you. I try to change the subject again, but he won't be sidetracked. What do you think your neighbors made of it? Did anyone follow you to the terrace? Yeah, 1 or 2 of them came to sniff me. Nothing unusual in that. But they did it politely from a couple of tables away. With the exception of Leah, a perfectly human Jewish woman who lives on the 2nd floor of whose only activity is purging for pirated DVDs around the Palacio de Bellas Artes, all the other guests in the Majestic are bicarnal. While they haven't yet come to the point of attacking me, their despairing, glazed expressions, exactly like the ones that used to make crack addicts stand out like sore thumbs, follow me everywhere. Tadeo refuses to let the topic drop. Did they say anything? He's beginning to annoy me. I wasn't taking much notice of them because I was spying on the soldiers. What soldiers? The ones who come around in the afternoon to take down the flag. It's the same old routine every day. In the morning, just before sunrise, an armed patrol parades across the Zócalo, unfurling a green, white, and red flag. When it's fully extended, they attach a strong rope and hoist it up a concrete and metal pole that may be 150 feet high. After that, marching in step with the same panache they displayed on arrival, they leave. The flag, on the other hand, spends the whole day up there, fluttering majestically over thousands of walking corpses and the hundreds of mouths of carnivorous flowers hundled in clumps around the Cathedral Metropolitana. In the evening, just before sundown, the soldiers return to collect the gigantic standard. They perform their military ballet in reverse order, detaching and furling the patriotic symbol with exasperating solemnity. Part of their task is to bear the requisite arms. They aren't just for show. Almost every day, the soldiers find themselves having to carry out the irksome task of executing a couple of the vermin who, having lost whatever brains they ever had, attacked the squad without the least respect for their uniforms. In the majority of such cases, the soldiers fire at point-blank range into the temple. The 47 caliber bullets sound dully on the paving stones, and the flesh eaters' heads plummet to perform the last slam dance of Mexico City. Even so, the soldiers rarely manage to avoid being nibbled. That might be why more than one of them inevitably stumbles or others attempt to keep their breast hidden, readjusting the dirty bandages covering their peeling skin. Practically, the whole army has been infected to some extent. There's no telling if this has to do with the constant patrols or the lonely nights in the barracks. And also, it's true that they get the best vaccines. It's also the case that cells of deserters spring up on a daily basis, or at least that's what CNN says. The national media have disappeared at the service of the worm catchers. Anything that still functions here relies on corrupting everything else until it becomes an allegorical mural of destruction. As happens with any real epidemic, ours began with a few isolated cases indistinguishable from the general sense of outrage transmitted by the now defunct, or depending on how you see it, omnipresent tabloid press. First, a construction worker murdered his lover and workmate on a building site. The authorities found traces of charred human intestines and heart on a piece of sheet metal placed over hot coals. The accused committed suicide during the trial. A year later, a young poet and professor at the University of Puebla was imprisoned for freezing fragments of his dead girlfriend, which he used as an aid to masturbation. Despite the fact that no one could prove he either killed or eaten her, the symptoms this individual displayed in the following years left no room for doubt. He was one of the earliest manifestations of a new reality emerging on the margins, belonging to no kingdom or species, a walking virus. Thank you.
The detective turned writer turned detective turned writer again, an inhabitant of Borderlands, in short. The narrator of Cristina Rivera Garza's novel, The Taiga Syndrome, describes her writing methods as producing noir novellas that are no more neatly resolved nor neatly recounted than her many failed investigations as a detective. This form of writing, she writes, wasn't about telling things how they were or how they could have been. It was about how they still vibrate right now in the imagination. To read from Rivera Garza's work is to apprentice in this form of writing, this way of being, to grow comfortable with one's past investigations remaining open, mysteries unsolved, questions unanswered, but not for that reason left behind. I said comfortable, but this form of writing is both deeply uncomfortable and often almost painfully pleasurable. The discomfort tempts the reader to, like the terrified male narrator of Rivera Garza's The Iliac Crest, seek revenge on the literary conspiracy that has opened him to such provocative instability by somehow mastering the mysterious manuscript. Of this I was sure, he says. I would read it, I would understand everything there was to understand, and then I would hide it once more without saying anything to anyone, without relaying any truths or revealing any mysteries. But the pleasure, meanwhile, much like the literary conspirators frequently remind the narrator, the pleasure reminds the reader that he was once a tree. Because I am a tree that thinks it's a man that thinks he only knows how to read in English, I consider myself both incredibly ill-equipped to adequately introduce Cristina Rivera Garza and also incredibly lucky to have so many more of her books to look forward to reading as English translators play catch-up. She is the author of, by my count, it's hard to tell exactly because the internet itself seems to have trouble keeping up with her achievements. 8 novels, 4 short story collections, 6 books of poetry, 3 books of nonfiction and theory, 2 of which, Grieving and The Restless Dead, are her most recent translations into English, and which situate the above-mentioned form of writing within a larger Rivera Garza arsenal of critical and political weaponry with which she voices, grieves, and disrupts the ambient flow of misogynistic and racist violence along the Mexican-US border, and resists the neoliberal states of both nations in their projects of erasing the body, freezing the emotions, and silencing the voice. There's so much more. There are volumes edited by, literature translated by, disciplines crossed by, artists collaborated with, even an opera co-written by the dangerously prolific Rivera Garza. She has been celebrated with the Roger Calwa Award for Latin American Literature and an Ana Segers International Prize. She has won the Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz Prize twice and was a 2020 MacArthur Fellow. She is a distinguished professor in Hispanic Studies and the director and founder of the Creative Writing Program at the University of Houston, which is the first PhD program in creative writing in Spanish in the US. I hope you will join me in being returned to a more unsure, arboreal, and uncontrollable state of being by welcoming Cristina Rivera Garza.
Thank you so much, Jesse. That was wonderful. Thank you for that introduction. Thank you for the invitation, Michael, and everybody in the English department. And I'm very glad to be sharing this screen with my very good friend, Julian. So that's wonderful. And I was thinking what to read today. I know that some of you have been reading sections of grieving, at least that's what Michael told me. And so I decided to do a couple of things. Read some sections of that book, especially the ones that we might easily label as poetry. But this morning I read in Spanish a poem that I translated into English a while ago, and I would like to start my reading with that poem, which is kind of an old poem, although new to English. And then I'm going to try to share with you some new work that I'm right now going through, which is an intervention of a history book, and I'll explain a little bit more later. And then I'll end with a section of grieving as such. And so hopefully that will take us just 10 minutes or so. So the first poem is Las Feministas, the feminists. And in this poem, I make reference to the Santana winds, which are strong and extremely dry downslope winds that originate inland and affect coastal Southern California and northern Baja California, known as devil winds. Santanas are infamous for fanning regional wildfires. They enunciated the word, celebrated it. They swam and ran with it. They ran away. Right behind this word, you should hear the wind blowing. They spoke against the grain, interrupting one another so shamelessly. They lived out in the open, which is the same place where they felt. I assume they were born this way. They didn't know anything about shelters, roof, protection, patronage. Everything hurt them. And everything here means history, air, the present, the context, the subjunctive, this fleeting. Agnostic rather than atheist, striking rather than beautiful, vulnerable rather than rickety, lively, more than you, more than myself, stoic rather than strong, blissful rather than blessed. Intolerant? Yes, indeed, at times. Did I already mention they were brutal? They walked carelessly in the cantankerous city as muses of themselves. These mostly happened in early winter when the Santana winds blew back and forth Tijuana avenues, dragging, discarding plastic wraps when dust forces you to close your eyes and foreclose reality. By the edge of the edge, swaying, they were the last drop clinging from the mouth of the bottle, the mythical drop of happiness or the proverbial tipping point of sex, impenetrable in the sameness of its orifice. And they spilled over. The worst and the waste, the epitome, the very last straw. Beneath these words, you should be able to smell the reek of the wind. I assume they only became that way over time. With men or without them, they kissed labiodentally, They moved quite often and changed their socks and prepared rice. They climbed down the stairs and took taxis and felt no compassion. They said, "This is the wind that cleans it all." They enunciated the word, emphatic, tenacious, pre-human. Categorical? Yes, quite often. Poignant rather than hallucinating. Civilian rather than conscious. Surreptitious rather than critical. Hypertextual, plain spoken. I'm sure I already said they were brutal. They spoke unequivocally. They turned pages with the devotion and the minimalist care of those in love. They were always in love. In the very dry days of the Santana winds, they faced the sky up and observed, and they could spend entire hours that way. Those birds that above their heads surmounted the antagonism of the air lucidly. And the Santana winds, right here, right now, you should hear the word, messed up their thick, fierce mane of hair, once again, their gory eyelashes, once again, and once again, the word. I am right now going to read you a couple of poems, recent poems, in fact, that I've been working on, as I said, this is an intervention of a book that I read somewhat recently and that it made an impact on me. It's this James Scott, Against the Grain, A Deep History of the Earliest States. And so I've been playing with James Scott's language in this book and playing with some of his main arguments. And I want to share just 2 or 3 poems of let me see, I'm going to start with 2 or 3 poems of this work. This one is called Pyrophytes. Fire is not a knife. Fire opened the canopy of the Amazonian rainforest. The eucalyptus of Australia owe their place on earth to fire, rearranges, reduces the radius of a meal. We cleared the land of all vegetations, urging grasses, seeds, shrubs, urging berries, fruits, urging nuts. Fire drove fleeing game from their path, exposed hidden burrows, the mushrooms that attracted grazing prey. We deployed fire to sculpt landscape. Come elk, deer, beaver, come hare, porcupine, ruffed grouse, come turkey, come quail. It's true we use fire to herd animals of precipices and elephants into bogs where immobilized we kill them. We built a niche over time, distributed resources to our liking, more abundant, more predictable, more at hand. This mosaic of biodiversity is ours, this physical safety. Long before your species appeared unseen, fire gave us warmth and light, gave us elk and nuts, gave us grass, fruits, deer, quail, gave us hearth. The litmus test of domestication says we cannot propagate by ourselves without the assistance of fire. This one is called, let me see. Domus, a concentration of till fields, seed and grain stores, people, domestic animals, all co-evolving with consequences we could not have possibly foreseen. Domestication from domus or household. The commensals, sparrows, mice, rats, crows, dogs, pigs, and cats. The microparasites, fleas, ticks, leeches, mosquitoes, lice, and mites. Not a single critter emerged from its sojourn at the late Neolithic multi-species resettlement camp unaffected. Our austere monastery, meticulous, demanding, interlocked, mandatory, the annual and daily routines of our domus, field clearing by fire, plow, harrow, sowing, weeding, watering, and constant vigilance as the crop ripened. Harvest set itself another sequence of routines, cutting, bundling, threshing, gleaning, the separation of straw, winnowing chaff, sieving, drying, sorting, our women's work, pounding, grinding, fire making, cooking, and baking, the background musical beat of the domus. Once we took that fateful step into agriculture, we entered an austere monastery whose taskmaster consisted on the demanding genetic clockwork of a few plants, wheat and barley, the metronome of our own crops. Civilization, a contraction of our species' attention to impractical knowledge of the natural world, a contraction of diet, a contraction of space, a contraction in the breath of a ritual life. And let me finish with the last section of Grieving, the book that Jesse mentioned in the introduction. This is Keep Writing. Because we become social in language, my I for you, your you for me, our you all for them. Because writing by nature invites us to consider the possibility that the world can, in fact, be different. Because the secret mechanism of writing is imagination. Because a manta is hung here that clearly reads, writing exists out there, right in front of you, as you walk about the world and in your imagination. Because imagination is another word for criticism, and this, the other word for subversion. Because those who write will never adapt. Because perhaps the heart of writing consists in no more than showing your face, and if necessary, offering the other cheek. Because memory, because writing teaches us that nothing is natural. Things are closer than they appear. Writing also tells us that. Because it is through the rectangular artifact we call a book that we communicate with our death. And all of the death are our death. Because a sentence produces memories that will be inhabited by names of Marcos and Jose Luis Piña Dávila, Ciudad Juárez, Chihuahua, January 30th, 2010. Because the contour of a page shows us the limits of reality. Because a manta is hung here that reads, tell them not to kill me. Because belonging is something I do through you, the sentence. Because at the end of each line, there is an abyss worth tumbling into, or launching yourself into, or disappearing into. Because look how the verb to burst bursts out of itself. Because two, it is what we would write in the case that we were to write. Because in its role as a word, each word questions the customs of our perception. Because a line is an imprecation or a prayer. Because terror stops there where the word terror stops, inscribed. Because there are voices that come from afar, from below, from beyond. because within books, I always greet the unfamiliar that I become so familiar with. Because a sentence produces memories that will be inhabited forever by the name of Lucila Quintanilla, Monterrey, Nuevo León, October 6, 2010. Because everything starts indeed with a sign. Because a paragraph is an extreme sport. Because when faced with the questions, is it worth it to get up early in the morning just to keep writing? Can writing, in fact, be something that acts against fear or terror? Since when has a page stopped a bullet? Has someone ever used a book as a shield over their chest, just a book, their heart? Is there a protected zone, somehow invincible, around a written text? Is it possible, not to mention desirable, to grip or wield or raise a word? My answer continues to be yes. Because yes is a small and sacred and savage word all at the same time. Because a manta is hung here that reads, we're a country in mourning. Because within these words continue to beat the names of the 41 children who died at the ABC daycare in Hermosillo, Sonora, 2009. Because I don't forget, because I will not forget, because we will never forget. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cristina and Julian, for your readings. Those were really fantastic. I wish we had so much more time, really, to hear even more. You can both turn on your audio and video, and we'll go ahead and jump straight into some questions. Just again, to sort of invite the audience to go ahead and put your questions in the Q&A box. And I'll get us started with just a couple things that have been on my mind reading your work. Cristina, I'd like to start by asking you about the term entrañable, right? The term that's translated as visceralist in grieving. And just to ask if you could maybe supplement that translation, sort of getting us back to the original and its meaning, and how you sort of settled on that as a way of talking about the sort of conditions in Mexico as you see them.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was a very hard word to translate. My translator and friend Sarah Booker and I talked a lot about it and went back and forth with several options. Entrañable is in itself a strange word to be used in the context in which I used it in this specific text. I was trying to think carefully about the main characteristics of a state, of the Mexican state, vis-a-vis the current state of violence, of unleashed violence related to the misnamed war on drugs, the true war on the citizenship. So I was trying to speak about a condition of a state that, unlike the state that got formed right after the Mexican Revolution in the 1920s, a state that was still that still believed in government and that still took into consideration, although paying kind of lip service to the conditions of the population. I was comparing that to a state that essentially have relinquished all responsibilities regarding the bodies of their constituents. And so I made a play on words between entrañas, which is just your guts, your innards, right? What makes a body, and entrañable, which is endearing. And so I was thinking of a state that cares about the body, is a state that cares about what is both outside of your body and inside, and therefore it might become endearing in a way. And this was based on a series of letters that an inmate from a health institution was issuing to the government of the state of the territory back then of Baja California. And when I read these letters, it was just, it was mind blowing just to see that a citizen, a poor woman, was actually writing a letter to the government, to the governor of the state to begin with, and that she was concerned, she believed at least enough that the governor would care about her body and her potential burial site and what was happened to her remains afterwards. Just that idea was so mind-blowing that I was thinking there was a time in this country in which someone, a poor woman from this godforsaken place on the border, could write this letter to the governor. And obviously, I mean, there was some answers. Some minor bureaucrat was in charge of continuing the conversation. And so I was, that's the context for the entraña entrañable. And so we needed a word that connected the inner contents of a body, the innards, the guts, to a specific temperament. And so for a while, we toyed with the word a heartless state, which I thought it was kind of like a, you know, like, I don't know. It was so new agey, right?
Too easy, yeah. Right.
Yeah, a little bit PC. And I said, no, we need something else. And then I don't exactly remember right now all the options, but then viscera, I think, was, you got at least half of the meaning right. Being a person who is visceral is not necessarily endearing, obviously, perhaps the opposite, but at least get that connection between viscera and a specific human temperament. And so that's how we came with the visceralist state. And we still, I mean, if there are some suggestions in the public, I'm more than welcome to consider options. We really talked about these till no end. And that was what we settled for. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it's so fascinating because I think, you know, even if it doesn't maybe capture the endearing aspect, of course, thinking about Julian's work, both there's a lot of viscera there as well, right? I mean, both, you know, some that is spilled very violently, yes. Right? But also like this sort of amazing scene in the section Fever from Tombsong, where the narrator describes his mother's body. And I was thinking about, Cristina, the comment from that essay about the idea that this woman would talk about, the woman whose letters you were looking at would talk about her body with such precision, right, to the governor, and sort of thinking about the narrator of Tombsong talking about his own mother's body in ways that are really difficult, but also accurate, right? I mean, the sort of the smell of the body that is stricken with leukemia and sort of overpowered by you know, drug treatments, et cetera, and how, you know, despite the horror of that, it is also in its way extremely endearing, right? Of you know, sort of like a demonstration of the love for the mother. So I kind of want to turn that phrase, the visceral estate, to you, Julian, and sort of, because I think you're looking at the same thing, but in a somewhat with different language, let's say.
Yes, thank you. I was thinking how we learn the language. So for me, the experience of writing Tombsong in that way is partly because this very rough language in my experience of the world came from my mother. So she was very, very direct with the language. She was very strong in the way she refers not only the word in general, but the body too. So for me, that was very. Of course I thought that later, not when I was writing, because when I was writing the novel, the first passages were written. I see that at the novel at the hospital. So the experience of the writing in situation, I think it's also in the text. I was thinking, because there was another question, and I want to connect it about the translation. For me, it's very difficult to explain this kind of things in English, and one of the reasons is because since I was a kid, I learned English from people who didn't speak it. No, they don't know how to speak English, but they told me how to do it. So that's some experience at the borders. For me, it's very interesting, because the use of the language sometimes. And I was thinking that when Cristina was explaining entrañable, I think that the problem of translation is not just the exact meaning of a sentence or a word, but also the experience of the use for each one of us have this social burden since the beginning. So the experience of the word is it has the body in it. So for me, the experience to write about the body of my mother has this burden. So I have to do it very I don't know how to say it upfront. Also, for me, that was an experience about anger, of course, but since the beginning, I saw the metaphor that my mother told me to, that our bodies are a metaphor or a synecdoche of Mexico. No, we are Mexico in our bodies, and that idea it wasn't very clear at the beginning, but I think it's in all the novel, this idea of the relationship between the human body and the language and the territory you live.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I'm thinking again about sort of later in that scene, the way in which you sort of map out the process of just getting medicines, right? And sort of like this kind of institutional sort of horror that is on the one hand sort of comic almost, but also truly devastating, because of there's always this potential for disaster, right? That's right there. We have a question, and this sort of picks up on what Julian was just talking about with translation. This is from Lindsay, and she's wondering if you could both talk about the experiences of being border writers in relationships to translation into English, whether self-translation or their collaboration with other translators.
Should I? Okay.
Sure, go ahead.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I was born right on the U.S. Mexico border in Matamoros, Tamaulipas, and so that and I've been living on border cities pretty much all my life. I've been living in the United States, I think, for 30 years now. I'm not so sure. I'm always kind of unsure about the specific number of years, but plenty of years, let me put it that way. And my books have only recently come into English translation, which has been a rather interesting process. I've been working very closely with translators, and it's been a complex, layered practice. It's a whole conversation. When I say that that translation for me is more versioning of text rather than just translating. I'm very true to the phrase. once we start a translation process, and the editors have been very, very generous in terms of what they invite me to do. And so usually it's sort of like, well, it's your text, you decide what to do with that. And in fact, that's what I do. So I end up rewriting good portions of my text. They look completely different. And that's something that happened with La Cresta de León, the Via Crest, that I ended up adding, deleting, rearranging, reshaping the book in English. And so when the time came for a new edition in Spanish, we used that recent English version of the text, and we translated that back into Spanish. So it's been a very interesting, convoluted, if you will, back and forth. One in which it is not very clear what is the original language, if there is such a thing. And something that has happened to me since most of my books, I've written most of my books from within the United States, living very closely with English. It seems to me that they were conceived in an English-speaking environment, even though they were written in Spanish. And so now that I see them in English, I have the very eerie sensation that they are in fact going back to their original language in many ways. And so at times it's rather frightening just to, you know, get into the process as such, because it is complex, and in the process there are many questions arising about, you know, the nature of creative work, the political innuendo in between, you know, meanings and context, and many more. But at the same time, it seems to me that it's one of the most creative tasks that I've been engaged with. And now I have incorporated translation very openly in my own creative work. So I usually write in one language, and then I revise in the other language, and then I bring back whatever I revised into the original text. And so I'm moving back and forth, and it's maddeningly slow work. But it is the best system that I've found so far. So I'm kind of suffering through it, but enjoying it at the same time. And it has become right now, as I said, sort of like a methodology, like a whole little system in place so far.
Okay, well, for me, it's a very, very different process, because I don't work that much with the translated text in English or other language. What I did before is I asked someone to read the text to me out loud, because I want to check the rhythm, and that's it. I just wanted, it sounds great in the other language.
Mm-hmm.
and then in what is the most enjoyable part for me is the questions of the translators. I have worked with Cristina three books, and she's wonderful translator, and I love to work with her, because she's so she has this very specific questions about mimesis, about the representation of reality in the text. And most of the times her suggestions are about rhythm and in the sentences. And for me, that's like, maybe I'm just lazy, but but what I think is how Cristina Maxwini feels the language is resembles my own experience, because it's more from the sound of not quite the ideas or the the visual, but the sound of the words. And I think that's my experience with her, and some of the things we discuss sometimes are the dialogues, because sometimes when I use like a specific regional speaking, we have we work with she used the we just work with short story, and I use the from Guerrero, from the Costa Grande, from Guerrero, the kind of language the people use there, and when we was talking about that, she said, I think it could sound like Scottish fishermen's, like my grandfather. So we work that way. And that was very, very fun. For me, I'm not that worried about the final result. I always think in the process. For me, it's more the process with the translator, because it's like talking with a very strange and at the same time very clever reader. And that's I think that's every writer's dream.
That's great. I know we're a little over time, but I'm wondering if we could just get one more question in, and it's the one here from Felicia, and that actually sort of picks up, I think, what you just said there, Julian, is this imagining a reader that you have in mind, someone who might be a future self, a loved one, a favorite writer that understands. I'm interested in the last part of this question, like the idea of wondering if writing is a way of explaining things to oneself, and really start thinking about the specific issues of these works that we've been talking about and hearing tonight.
Are you going to, you're asking to me or both?
Whoever wants to go first, yeah.
Do you want me to ask first?
You go first.
Okay. Let me, okay, I will, I always write, I work a lot with young writers in like workshops and etc. And I always say, this is an idea from Stephen King, in fact, that he said you have to have an ideal reader for everything you write, because that helps the orientation. I think it's accurate. For me it works. I especially feel that when I was writing precisely Thompson, because originally it wasn't a novel. It was a letter for my former wife, Monica. It was a letter that I sent to her when I was at the hospital. I feel this need to tell her something about me, and so I write it as a letter. And then the experience of write that way was for me was changed everything forever. And then I try to work that way, but so I sometimes I'm thinking in some kind of reader, like this with Cristina, that when I was writing this story, La Historia de la Soga is the title in Spanish. I was writing with slang, Mexican slang, knowing that it's gonna be a problem for her. So it was for Cristina. So but sometimes I'm thinking mostly in not only in readers. I work a lot with the idea of how someone could solve this problem. For example, in The Roman Wedding is a short story in Bring Me the Head of Quentin Tarantino. I wrote a lot of the passages thinking how how the point of view will be constructed by Martin Scorsese. That was my idea. That's my sometimes my ideal reader is in fact another artist from other discipline.
That's very interesting. And you know, I'm always thinking of the reader as someone who is always about to leave. That's a function of the reader. The reader is about to leave permanently, and my task is to create a situation that might make that reader stay for a while. Right? And so my only tool at hand is language, and I can do whatever I can with that in order to create that very intimate, very political, very strong connection, the connection between readers and writers. I think of writing as a creative process. Readers, as the saying goes, readers decide what the story is about, and they bring with them entire experiences, languages, their own package, so to speak, and it's wonderful when they do something with the books that I've written that I had no idea I was doing. You know, it's when they tell me, well, your story is about whatever, and I'm like, oh, well, now it is, right? And obviously there must be some sort of connection because there is a book that we share, there's a text that we are sharing, but I really think of that wonderful creative process as one that is somehow the closest I know to a sacred experience. I'm not very religious, but in terms of what we do with text, with language together, thinking together in this very specific context, I take that very seriously. And in my best moments, when I'm the most optimistic, I would like to think about a reader that does not yet exist, a reader that is going to be the result of that new connection, a result of what we do together with language in that specific moment, which at time is text, at time is a reading like the one that we just did, and might vary in any case, but that's when I'm very optimistic. It's like, yes, there's a new reading there, there's a new reader, and I'm going to be able to create something with her.
I love that. It's I think that's a great place to end for this evening. We have a couple more questions about some specific pieces, but maybe we'll see if we can fit those in at the round table. But I just want to say thank you again for being with us tonight, and thanks to everyone who has attended. And I really hope that you'll be able to join us tomorrow at 10 a.m. For Fernanda Melchor and Eduardo Halfon, and then also for the round table at noon. And until then, thank you and good evening.
Hey, gracias. Hasta luego, Julián.
Muchas gracias. Adiós. Te mando un abrazo. Nos vemos mañana.
Claro que sí. Bye, bye. Bye. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye. Goodbye.
Bye. Good night.